What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you, as always, for joining us today. Our fellow teacher, Dr. Kate Truitt, is back with us today to talk about new opportunities in healing the pains of the past with neuroscience and the havening techniques. Excuse me. Dr. Kate is a licensed clinical psychologist, author, applied neuroscientist, and holds an MBA in healthcare administration. She speaks internationally on topics related to the neuroscience of trauma, stress, and resilience, and is honored to be one of the developers of the havening techniques. Dr. Kate resides in Los Angeles, where she is honored to lead the expert team of world-class clinicians at Dr. Kate Truitt and Associates and the Trauma Counseling Center, as well as serve as CEO for the Amy Research Foundation. She has dedicated her life to empowering healing and wellness through the integration of neuroscience into clinical care and self-healing practices. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Dr. Kate.
Great to be back. I always enjoy spending time with you, Andy. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, right back at you. Thank you so much for doing this. And okay, so we're going to dive right into the awesomeness of neuroscience, which is your specialty.
One of my favorite things.
So what are the main areas of the brain that are impacted during trauma? And today we're talking childhood trauma specifically.
Yeah. Well, of course, our friend Amy, the amygdala, is very deeply involved. And in fact, little known piece of data that not many people are aware of, our amygdala is mostly fully formed before we even start breathing air, before we're even born. And so she plays a huge role in defining our sense of safety and security in the world, whether that be in a thrive space or not. And the amygdala, as well as a couple other critical primal brain parts, are linked up to what we tend to think of as self, our thinking brain. And so if our brain is learning that the world is scary or dangerous, or that we don't have safety or a sense of lovability or belonging in our childhood, these early brain parts will impact the way all of our other brain systems develop. So the hippocampus, our prefrontal cortex, our working memory, even a little part of our brain called the anterior cingulate gyrus that plays a critical role in vasopressin and oxytocin, and also helping our brain go, hey, this is what I like, or this is what I want to pay more attention to, in either a thriving or survival-based way. So our brain is, as we know now, really developing up until we're our late 20s, early 30s. Adolescence now is considered to expand through our 20s. And so as our brain is developing, if we're experiencing really painful, hard, or stressful things, it will impact everything downstream.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I honestly didn't know that about that it's still developing up until 30. It's making sense why certain things I did in my 20s. Like, okay, right. Yes, I still was very, very much felt like, a kid in so many ways. So yeah, that's fascinating. So how do these impacts affect our behavior as well as our emotions in our life?
Well, so if our brain's developing across our 10s, 20s, 30s, then our brain is also learning, how do we stay safe? How are we successful in the world? And success isn't money in a bank. Success is, do I have food on my table? Do I have a roof over my head, shoes on my feet? And all of those things are impacted through the experiences that we bear witness to as we grow and develop, which means they imprint on us. So if you think about the story of the duck who imprints on a human and follows the human around, that's in a similar way what the experiences of our early childhood do to our brain. They imprint on us and they guide the way our brain learns to show up in the world, which then plays a huge role, of course, in our behaviors, in our emotions, in our thoughts, even how our body makes sense of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I was just having that image of the duck that's imprinting on the human, and I'm sure so many people know that story, and a good visual representation for what we're talking about. So, why is understanding the brain, right, neuroscience, why is it so important when we talk about trauma recovery?
Well, selfishly, because I think it matters, but and a large reason for that is, going through my own recovery journey from a complicated childhood. It wasn't until I was in rat labs understanding how my own brain worked that I was like, oh, those rats are doing a much smaller version of what I do, running around in my 20s, to your point.
Mhm.
And the repetition of the behavioral pattern. And that's, for me, planted a seed of, wait a minute, for me, that took a lot of shame off the table. And then I started following a lot of neuroscientists and exploring and realizing that there's a lot of information out there that highlights the more we understand, the happier our brain is. And therefore, it stands to reason that the more that we can understand how our own brain is functioning and start to recognize that, wait a minute, these are human patterns that have occurred because of the experiences we've survived across the course of our life, then that opens the door to compassion and empathy and self-awareness and introspection, rather than being mired in the deep fundamental beliefs of I'm broken, I'm crazy, something's wrong with me, clearly not things I ever struggled with. And that we can instead go, wait a minute, brain. In fact, high five for keeping me alive. You learned that being broken is actually a way to experience the world because that creates, oddly, safety from something. So it changes our ability to create the space that is necessary for our thinking brain to come on board and start participating in the healing journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love your comment about the high five to the brain, because absolutely. Yeah, when you start, at least in my experience, really understanding what's going on and how it's working and how it all protects us from X happening in the future. It's pretty brilliant. It's pretty brilliant mechanisms that obviously our brains are to protect us. And then yes, there are the ways that it isn't protecting us anymore, so to speak. So we need to work through those. So, okay, let's talk about havening. For people who don't know what that is, what is the havening technique?
So havening grew out of a decades-long exploration by two doctors, Doctors Ron and Stephen Rudin, who I know have spent time with you in the past. And basically, they were trying to identify the underlying mechanisms of tapping and eventually learned a lot about EMDR and saying, whoa, why do these things work? And over the course of literally a decade, started to down arrow into critical mechanisms of action that not only downregulate the brain. So if you think about breath work, downregulates the heart. There's certain things that we can do to downregulate the brain, but also harness the power of neuroplasticity to create long-lasting change. And one of the things that happens through the mechanisms of action, which is what's known as the havening touch, is that shift electrochemically that happens through the application of the havening touch can interact directly with something called stress-induced structural plasticity. Now, just like we have neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, well, when it's stress-informed, that's stress-induced structural plasticity. And to your point about our brain going, hey, I got to stay alive, it will prioritize processing stress-informed data before it will positively inform data. And so the havening techniques developed into an entire suite of protocols that allows us to work with these complicated, traumatic, stress-informed neural pathways and move through them, release them, and then harness the opportunities of neuroplasticity to build new pathways to anchor into what we want more of, resilience.
Mm-hmm. And could you give an example of like how one would actually experience this? I know that it's not necessarily right. Like everybody watching is in a one-on-one session or something, but just to give people an idea of what the havening touch is, like when it would be applied and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two common use cases with havening. One is in our community-focused initiative. So what I call the healing in your hands, hence the name of my book, protocols. And then one is in a treatment framework. In the community space, so the self-application, self-healing world, the havening touch is really powerful anytime we want to help our brain stop feeling negatively or stop having painful experiences around something. And anytime we want more of a positive sense. And the application of the havening touch is simply palm against palm as though you're washing your hands under warm water. Something I call the havening hug, fingertips on your shoulders, moving gently down your arms to your elbows and repeating that motion. Then fingertips across the brow. If you've ever had a tension headache, our audience may be familiar with this one. And then if you've ever wiped away a tear, this is the other touch. So these 4 touches can be used in unison or one-on-one. Most people have a sweet spot that will downregulate the brain and create change. One of my favorite healing in your pans protocols is the creating personal resilience for the amygdala, or CPR for the amygdala. So it's basically like the amygdala is freaking out. We're in a shame spiral. We're feeling panicky. We're in a moment of rage and we're going, I don't want to rage. Or we're craving a substance and we don't want to go for that substance. All of those things are amygdala based, and our amygdala is starting to chime in. So CPR for the amygdala allows us to snap the amygdala out of it. So what that looks like is we're sensing a disturbance. That's the S of snap. We're noticing what's going on. So on a 0 to 10 scale, how strong is this disturbance in the force, so to speak? We're applying the havening touch, any of those 4 areas we just walked through, and then we're preoccupying the brain. And that looks like singing songs, playing brain games, even I'll just invite you right now to imagine you're bouncing a basketball. And the brain will zero in on the sensory experience of bouncing a basketball. And that means the amygdala can't ruminate about all the scary bad stuff or harness up more of the difficult emotions, thoughts, or feelings. And that with that havening touch downregulates the system. Mm-hmm. That's an on-the-go tool, snapping the amygdala out of a spiral. And then in the treatment space, we can do really specifically targeted work on traumatically encoded experiences and work with the deep anchors, what we call the case for trauma, our cognitions, our body response, the somatosensory emotional responses that encode to trauma and then guide our future behaviors, whether it be PTSD or anxiety, depression, severe insomnia, social phobia, so many other things. Mm-hmm. And so we have specific protocols that we use to target that and also build resilience, because havening allows us to build more of what we want. So heal the past, create the present, build the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you for going through the different, ways that people could apply this at home. And you mentioned the word downregulate several times. So you said, right, breath work can downregulate our heart. And what are the things that downregulate our brain? Can you share a little bit more about what that means for people who don't know the word?
Yes, good catch. Thank you. So when we're in a moment of emotional amygdala hijack, so, a time where feeling really angry or upset or ruminating on something, or also a time where we're feeling really disjointed or disconnected from the world, our amygdala is playing a role. And frequently that it's accompanied by a really, really fast brainwave state. So you think about rapidly drawing jagged lines on a piece of paper. That's kind of what it feels like in the mind and the body. Like things just feel like they're electric or on fire. So that's a gamma or a hyper gamma wave. It's very fast, it's very rapid, and it actually, when it's strong enough, will close down our prefrontal cortex. And so the down regulation that the havening touch creates is literally slowing down that brainwave state into a theta or a delta wave state. And so if you think about a very calm, lovely ocean and the waves slowly moving in and out, that is the slow wave state. And that's where we have the space to be present, for our brain to come back online, for us to think clearly about what's happening, and to be responsive rather than the reactive amygdala response.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And calming the brain calms the body, just like calming the body calms the brain. It's, as Andrew Huberman says, a closed loop system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for going through that, just in case anyone was wondering what that meant. And I love that you mentioned too that, I don't know if you said the word distract, that's what I'm putting in here, but that we can pseudo distract our brain by imagining, yes, the basketball and what that feels like, maybe hearing it in our minds and all that. I think that's so fascinating that we can do that. What a powerful skill to be able to learn, to be able to do that and have that down regulation.
Yeah. Well, so our brain has a system in it called the working memory system that is best described as a Google search engine. And so if you pop a couple words into Google search, what happens? You get tons of entries tied to that. And so if you were to pop a couple stress-based words that have impacted something from our past, so a negative experience from the past, like dark, scared, and alone, then that working memory system is going to start to Google all of those experiences from our life tied into, no matter how remotely, having something that's dark, scary, and being alone. And so that working memory system carries about 7 to 11 bits of data at any time for all of us. That's just kind of how that part of our brain works. So we can give that part of our brain a different job. And because it's a pretty fundamental system, imagining bouncing a basketball, or if, singing a song or humming a song, and now don't sing like a Elliott Smith or Nine Inch Nails. I wouldn't recommend that because that could have some other stuff, but singing a song that's positively valenced can start to help the brain go, wait a minute, I'm not going to Google search the hard stuff. Instead, here's some neutral stuff to Google, or even some positive stuff to Google. Mm-hmm. And then it's that electrochemical shift with the havening touch that actually then down regulates the brain. And here's the cool thing, Andy, with that CPR for the amygdala, we're actually able to de-link whatever it was that triggered us in that immediate moment, so that we're less likely to have that type of emotional or cognitive or behavioral response in the future.
And that goes back to your point of right, like building the resilience, right, for the future. So, okay, right. Yes, we can heal the past. We can be present in the moment and also be cultivating like a great future for ourselves. Okay. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I think you've touched on this already, but I'm going to ask you anyways, in case you want to say more about it. What happens to the brain during a trauma trigger?
So it could be something that we're actually aware of, or a lot of triggers are like sleeper cells. So sometimes we get triggered and then a behavior or reaction doesn't show up until an hour later. And maybe we get triggered and then another thing, small thing, thought small thing. And then our brain's like, now I'm really upset. But in those moments when the trigger happens, our brain is tuning into, specifically our amygdala, any of the elements that were present in the moment of what's called an Emily encoding. And Emily is something that Dr. Ron Rudin developed. It's a great acronym to understand trauma encodings. That means there was an event that happened is the E, the M is the meaning. What is the meaning making in that moment? The landscape, how vulnerable is the brain in that moment? And does it feel inescapable? We can't get out, real or perceived. And if it's an Emily, the brain builds a case for trauma, the cognitions, the autonomic, somatosensory, and emotional experiences. If it's not an Emily, but it's still pretty bad, our brain builds that stress-induced structural plasticity. Regardless, everything that's sensory in that moment, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, our amygdala is going, it's a bad thing. I'm going to remember that because that could hurt me again in the future. And then depending on how bad that it is in the moment, the brain's going to tag that as a more important Google search for the future experience of life. And a trigger is something that shows up 2 years, 5 years, 2 weeks, 10 years, 25 years later, where the brain goes, that reminds me of that thing that happened back there. I was hurt back then. I was scared back then. I was whatever it was. And our brain recreates that response in the present day moment. And it's different than a flashback because we're not back in reliving the experience. It's just our brain going into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever it might be, trauma response of here's how I survived. Because our amygdala is going, oh, I'm going to be hurt again. I need to do that same thing that reinforced my survival last time.
Yeah, so interesting. And I love the way that you describe it as it relates to Google in the world of living in modern times and being able to see it in that way. And that, like you said, that like tagging system of yes, tagging this, it's a keyword for the future, right? Yeah, so
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, great way of looking at it and understanding it in a new way. And since you mentioned fear in there, obviously the fear, freeze, fawn, I know you talk a lot about how fear can really derail our brain. Could you talk a little bit more about this and how this can impact our day-to-day life?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, ever been hijacked? I have. So there's the
Yes.
impact when we're in that moment and we're just it can almost feel like an actual real barrier for us to figure out a way to stop thinking about something or to calm down, or if we're even dissociated, to get back into the moment or back into our body. All of those responses are amygdala driven and they're fear responses. So our fear response is actually 4 times faster than our thinking brain in response to any stimulus in the moment. So if there's a loud crash in the room, our amygdala, 4 times faster than our prefrontal cortex, is going to be saying, what do I think about that crash? Does that make sense? And if the crash is tied to something possibly scary, then our amygdala will start guiding how our brain is interpreting and reacting to the world around us. So our amygdala plays a critical role. And over the course of time, if we're living with a lot of traumas, going back to our talk about childhood trauma, our amygdala starts to define the narrative nature of our world. Narrative being, again, how we think about ourselves, how we feel, how our body responds to the world around us, and how we interpret our internal sensory system. And that then guides the filter through which our brain experiences the world, which can be fear-based because our amygdala has designed the construct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fascinating. When you're talking about this, I was thinking about my dog, because for anyone who has dogs or pets and watches them react to a noise or something unusual, and I was just thinking about our little guy sometimes, like a firework will go off, and he's just like, whoa, what's happening, and that like really really fast response. So another maybe way of thinking about it as it relates to our own brains and like how quickly we go to something if we don't understand it, that how scary that can be to the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if it's tied to something from our past that we're not even aware of, same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about that. Obviously, fear being something that can totally derail us in our daily lives in different ways, but we can help ourselves calm down. Is there anything else you want to say about calming tools? I know you obviously went through the Havening Touch. Anything else there?
There's so many different opportunities like polyvagal, doing mindfulness work, yoga, meditation, all of these things help the brain and the body down regulate, doing self-compassion letters and journaling. So many incredible opportunities. And then when we integrate in the Havening Touch, it's creating a greater sense of permissiveness for everything else to work. And so I'm definitely obviously a huge fan of it because it just up levels all of the other psychotherapeutic tools that we've been using for so long with great efficacy. And even the distraction parts, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. We've been using distractions in CBT forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing how it can all work obviously together. And yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. Well, so there's a button below that links over to a place where you can purchase the book. Anything else you want to say about what they'll get out of that, or any other way people can learn about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is, like I said, it's a guide, and it basically goes through those case elements: cognition, automatics, somatosensory emotion. It's a journey. And for parents, burnout, self-compassion, like how are we building these experiences in to heal the past, build the present, create the future? And a lot of the people who come to my book also are large participants in my social media channels. I have a TikTok channel where I answer questions that people have about neuroscience or trauma, anything mental health related. I do a video a day answering a question. So if our audience has questions about how neuroscience and everything interplays, then head over to the TikTok channel. It's just my name. It's a lot of fun and lots of great questions pop up. And then I also have my YouTube channel where I do something similar, but the videos are obviously a little bit more longer and more in depth. And then every week I release a guided exercise that's a healing in your hands tool for moving into deeper relationship with self while proactively healing the wounds of the past.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I love the video a day. That's great for people to get those questions answered. So everyone watching, the button to Dr. Kate's book is below. You can go check that out. Do you have any last insights? Anything else you want to leave people with before we wrap up?
If anybody wants to go deeper live, we do have an upcoming workshop on May 19th. And I think that my primary takeaway, Andy, is always first, thank you for the incredible work that you and Ike do. It's such a generous gift to all of us to be able to listen to the incredible experts that you bring into this space. So thank you. And I just invite everybody to remember in those moments of amygdala hijack to take a breath and go, high five, brain. You're trying to keep me alive. I appreciate that. And what if we're okay right now?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's such a great way of looking at it, and a way to be playful with it too. So that's very important. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kate. I so appreciate you doing this again. And thank you, AVAIYA students who are watching or listening, for showing up for yourself today on your own healing journey. We will see you all again very soon. Take care. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this last class with Dr. Kate Truitt. She was back with us today talking about new opportunities in healing the pains of the past with neuroscience and behavioring techniques. I really enjoyed Dr. Kate. I think she does such a great job of explaining neuroscience to us as it relates to trauma, and specifically childhood trauma. And the really biggest take-home message for me was to give your brain that high five, give your amygdala that high five when it is there protecting you, doing what it is designed to do. It is a pretty amazing creature that we have within us that helps us stay safe, that helped us stay safe when we were younger, and perhaps we created coping mechanisms that we're now trying to unravel and let go of if they're not serving us anymore. But just overall recognizing what a brilliant creation the brain is, and how it can keep you safe and does keep you safe. And obviously recognizing when we are triggered and when our amygdala is triggered in these moments, that we do have solutions. We have things that we can do. We have havening techniques. We have havening touch. We have ways to calm ourselves down, to down regulate, right, the brain, and as well as the heart and nervous system, and settle ourselves down and calm ourselves down. So there are tools at our fingertips for all of these different things in these moments that are very difficult, like a trauma trigger. So I hope that you found this helpful, everyone, and we will see you again very soon. Take care.
AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.